before we go into your story of the Skimm, I actually want to talk more about both your lives prior as journalists. What were you both working on at the time, and what did you like and not like in your career then?
So Carly and I both grew up wanting to work in journalism. I should say, I think what really drew us to that world was the idea of storytelling. I think that evolved. Was it journalism? For me, was it going into politics? Carly loved documentaries and would pretend to like be the next kind of Katie Couric while waiting for school to start. And I will embarrass her too by saying she started her own zine back in the day. Um,
I love
Thank you for sharing.
yes,
I had one too. Don't worry, Carly.
I never did. For those of you that don't know what it is, it's basically what it sounds like. Um, and but we really just grew up loving kind of all different forms of media and storytelling. And we actually met studying abroad in college in Rome, and then we both went to work for different parts of NBC News. So I'll talk a little bit about my experience and then throw it to Carly. I think that what I learned that I loved about working in news is two things. I really loved being part of a team, and there is such a camaraderie. And Carly and I talk about it like on big moments, whether it's an election night. We'll kind of like we're usually together, but if we're not, we're texting or have like the group thread open and slacking, and just that feeling of watching something happen in real time and having different people that like your job is to process that information together and make sense of it for a specific audience. I was also thinking kind of this weekend how much I love being forced to be on a deadline. Um,
Yes.
I am really organized in my personal life. Like I'm kind of like I live by my calendar. I think months ahead. And professionally, I'm much more of a procrastinator. I do really well when it's like you have 1 hour to complete this task. And I'm like, great, time box it, I'll get it done. And so I feel like I really learned those things about myself. Things that I struggled with, honestly. I love being able to think about different opportunities. And I think in news business, we started at a time when like digital was a word, right? Like when people were like, oh, you're on the digital team, and it wasn't quite the same as like the more kind of glorified broadcast team. And what that means is really that we both, I think we're hungry for an opportunity to see more ahead of us. That doesn't mean that we were necessarily like jumping at the chance to give up any kind of modicum of stability and start something at 25. And I think I also really love taking something, diving into it, kind of becoming like a real geek about something, and then explaining it. And there was a time when that was like, what was going on kind of in an omnibus spending bill. And now it's about so much of what makes up our experience as women living in this country every day.
Yeah, for me, it's funny, like when Danielle talks about the deadline thing, my heart like literally races because we're the
Same.
opposite. I love planning ahead for work and I hate planning ahead for my personal life. So for me, what I really loved was I love puzzles. Like I'm literally sitting here talking to you with like the puzzle I'm working on in front of me. Like I always have puzzles around. And I worked in documentaries and I worked kind of longer form programming and features for NBC News. And I loved the puzzle of like finding the person we had to interview, figuring out like going through old archival footage of like, oh, like if I can get this angle, then I can get that. Like I was just really good at that and like really good at chasing down different interview subjects and getting footage that hadn't been shown before and things like that. I loved that. I loved being like in the place, in the proximity of the action. Like we both worked at 30 Rock, and I swear like my dream would be to like be the superintendent of that building.
I
Like
love it.
I loved walking the halls and like, you're like, there's Tom Brokaw, like there's Brian Williams, there's Hoda. That was, I was just like, this is incredible. Like the history here is just amazing. I think that what I didn't love, other than the deadlines, and it's why I kind of left breaking news, which is what I went into first. What I didn't love was I felt like without knowing I was being entrepreneurial, like I felt like I like really understood like how to market the shows that I was working on, or what the kind of like business opportunities for partnerships or whatever could be done to make those programs even better. And anytime I tried to kind of do more or stretch my skill set, I felt like I always hit some sort of obstacle. And mostly the feedback was like, because it's not your lane or it's not what we do. And there's a whole department for that and a whole other side of the building. And I just, I remember, you get like rating numbers and there would be town halls. And I was like, why is everything so disjointed, where if you just thought about it of like how everything helps one another, like we could be so much more efficient in everything. And I like couldn't figure out how to do that as a 25-year-old in a huge behemoth of a company. But ultimately, like when I look back, like what bugged me, like that is what bugged me. And that is why I loved having a smaller company.
It's so interesting because, like you mentioned, you guys, I think in different ways were showing these entrepreneurial skill sets. You didn't know at the time that it was necessarily that. But I also read in another interview, you guys would always, through the years of your friendship before the Skimm, would kind of spitball different ideas and stuff. So I want to hear more about that in your relationship. And did you ever anticipate that one day one of those ideas would turn into a business?
So we didn't spitball different ideas. We
Okay.
I was gonna
spitballed one
say, there
idea,
was just one.
which was the Skimm. We just didn't have a name for it. Um, and it's funny because it's really a testament to like that we were so on the same page and like the vision of what we saw, because we literally never articulated to the other like this is the idea. We just like both knew. So it was so funny, like when I think back, like when we would have dinners or like text each other things, it was like we were talking about the exact same thing without ever saying like, by the way, in case you weren't sure, to clarify, my point of view is the opportunity is blank. Like we never did that. And like even when we came up with the voice for the Skimm, we were like, okay, we were roommates and we are like, you go into your room, I'll go into mine. Let's come back in an hour and see what we think the voice of the Skimm is. We each like wrote an article. We came back and like they were identical. It was actually like scary. We were like, oh, okay, so that's the voice. Like we clearly just both saw it, felt it, and like just understood it. I remember for my birthday present, the year we launched, Danielle, my gift was like she had the logo made for the company, the
Oh,
original
sweet.
logo. And it's like we had never talked about what that would be, but when she showed it, I was like, that's exactly what I wanted it to be. So we spitballed like the name, we spitballed like how to get it off the ground. And, at one point we were like, we should do it anonymously, kind of like Gossip Girl style. That would have been terrible.
Interesting.
But the actual like idea, it was always like this idea of how do we break down information in a really digestible way.
Interesting. I love that. And it seems like you guys were talking about this one idea like over months or maybe even over years. Was that the case? Yeah, years. So I love that because I think it shows a reality of starting a business. Like you have an idea, but you don't necessarily start the next day because you don't really know whether your timing is off or it just takes time to kind of bring it to life. So fast forward a few years, you guys are still talking about this one idea. You officially quit your job, and both of you in an interview said it was, one of the most scariest days in your life. So I'm curious, like, take us back to that moment because even for me, officially quitting is like one of the hardest parts of launching and starting a business. So I'd love to kind of hear both of your perspectives around that.
It was terrifying. Also, we had kind of like two sides of the same coin when we thought about it. The first part was that we were living in a very expensive city. We had about $2,000 saved up, and we had an idea, and that was kind of it. And we were leaving jobs that we'd worked really hard to get and to move up within, and it's not jobs that we disliked. It was a feeling of being frustrated that we could do more. We told our families about it, and our parents really like to gloss over this part of the story, that they were like, maybe wait, like maybe save up some more money, maybe don't do this now. And they gave us, a lot of emotional support. I think they were really terrified for us. There was no safety net financially. And I also think that they didn't really know what to do with us. Kind of like, this is kind of insane, but I guess you're going to have to, like, do it and figure it out. And then on the other side, we also realized we were in our mid 20s. We didn't have, aside from ourselves, there were no responsibilities. And I think we had a real kind of, in that way, maturity around our thinking that this would always be hard, but there wasn't going to be a time when it was going to be as simple as it was then. And so we, planned as much as we could, meant we saved as much as we could, which was not a lot. We went grocery shopping thinking that we couldn't afford to do takeout that much. We thought about, like, what our side jobs would be, which also made no sense because they all involved working at night, which is when we ended up writing through the
Oh,
night.
so you thought that you would have another side job just to
Yeah.
help get extra funds during it?
Yeah, specifically, Danielle, what was your side job going to be?
Well, I have no musical ability, but I was like, everybody's a DJ. I'm sure I could, like,
Yeah,
figure out how to be a DJ
that's
because it's late at
amazing.
night, which would have been honestly probably like remixed Britney Spears on repeat. Like, it would have been awful. I love Britney, but like my musical taste is not very diverse. And
That's funny. Oh my gosh.
so, both things were true at the same time, that we saw this glaring opportunity. It was kind of like now or never. I think that the fact that there were two of us, kind of like we pushed each other to jump. And I think if it had just been either one of us solo, it probably would have been like, wow, we had this great idea and we never did it. And I think that there is a specific type of momentum and accountability when you are starting something with someone.
It's funny. I recently found, and we put on our Instagram, my resignation letter. And now being on the other side as like an employer, like if somebody sent me this letter, I'd be like, who wrote this? I'd be like, did ChatGPT write this for you? Like, it was so overly like formal and polite. And like, I was like, I'm going to move on for a different endeavor, but like, I'm sure I will be back in a few weeks or a few months to, circle back and see if there's any opportunities. But basically, I mean, in hindsight, like, we both believe in signs. Like, there were like two real signs. The show I was working on, they switched me to a show I didn't want to work on. Danielle had a promotion that she was expecting and it got delayed. And it was just both of us being like, we're like, in the summer, things in the summer always like seem easier. And we're
Yeah,
like,
true.
okay, it's July, like we could quit now. We have enough money saved to pay rent until election season. And in election season in news, everyone gets hired as freelancers. So we'll at least
Okay.
get hired like through the end of the year. So that was like the big
Mhm.
game plan, which was not a very secure plan. But so it's funny because when I quit, I wouldn't tell anybody where I was going. I was like, I'll reach out to you in like a week. But I was like, I think I have something lined up. And we launched, I think I left, my last day was a Thursday and we launched that Tuesday after.
Oh my gosh, so quick. And I think, I believe both of you guys, was this before you left your jobs officially or shortly right after, where you emailed like your entire network about your idea? So what was that? Because that momentum was, I'm sure, really pivotal that early in the business.
Yeah, I mean, we got to work right after. Like Danielle, didn't you like have your last day on Monday? Like you had like no day off. Like we
I
started
had
on
no day off.
Tuesday.
I think I had like a long weekend, and then we started the list and we launched right after. And the
Yeah.
deal with emailing people was like we each got 2 vetoes of who we put on that list. And that was it. And it was back in the day where you could pull people's emails from Facebook.
Oh,
Um, so it was
Game changer.
really, yeah. It was really like we had to be very thoughtful about who were the 2 people that we really just could not stand to reach out about our venture. And other than that, it went on the list.
I love that. And it's interesting. So you guys, started right after you quit. There's also something really interesting about when there's not really like a plan B, like you have that fire under you, right? Like I'd love to maybe hear your perspective on that.
I think it was the best thing that ever happened to us. You are the most productive and most like ambitious when you like have nothing and everything to lose kind of thing. And like,
Love
I
that.
think this had to work. Like there was no like, this doesn't work. It was like, this has to work. And we like truly like willed it into fruition. It was working harder, like in a way that's like not humanly possible to like recreate. Like we just kind of survived off of adrenaline. Like I don't even want to know what our cortisol levels were,
I
but like
know. I'm sure.
we truly, I mean, we weren't sleeping. We were just running on adrenaline, and um, it propelled us, like that got us to a place of real scale within a few months, and a lot of press and a lot of networking that started to lead to being able to raise a small round of money. But it was like like completely running on empty. But it was like, if we don't make this happen, like then we have failed and we don't have jobs to go back to, or we have to figure out like how to do that. And I think we both knew that we didn't want to go back to what our careers were. So like it was about kind of figuring out what would a new life for ourselves be. And it's like we really just wholeheartedly believed in this so much. And I think one of the gifts of the type of company that we are and the type of product we launched is we put something out into the universe and got immediate feedback on it. So even when you have that insecurity, like, is anyone going to like this? Or like, is anyone going to use this? And even when like investors were like, no, not for me, or like, well, like 5,000 people signed up today. And like they're writing us saying like this is the greatest thing in their life. So like something's working. And then, that became 50,000, that became 100,000. So it's like that those numbers going up so quickly was the most validating thing, and I think truly helped us bring this to life.
Yeah, and what I so appreciate about both of you guys, and you touched on this, is just like the pure hustle you had and early days of just like legit grassroots marketing. Like you guys didn't have a lot of money. This was pre-raising that first small round. So tell us more about like the creative ways you guys built that traction and really got that like very early organic hockey stick growth.
We were pretty uh, annoying with grassroots marketing, meaning if you were one of our good friends, you definitely got a t-shirt in the mail that was kind of the first iteration of Skimm swag. And then we would have you send us pictures of you wearing it. So we really held you accountable
I love that.
to that like $25 return. And we would ask people to wear it to like, work out, to go for a walk, any places that they went repeatedly. And we were really about, what do people do every single day? What are their habits? And so we thought about, when you wake up, do you walk your dog, right? Like I had a Skimm like dog leash later. We went to coffee shops. We would leave Skimm flyers. We snuck into Equinox bathrooms and got like promptly asked to leave and would just leave flyers. I remember like, my mom, there was like a block party and she printed out like stands with Skimm posters, just really basic things like that. We would host like viewing parties for debates, and election night that first few months that we launched. And it was really just like four people, but we would take pictures like it was an exit poll, that there were so many people around, and we just kept it up. And we invited people to kind of get in on it. And from there, we started, or really the idea of a Skimmbassador program formed around us, which was mainly women who were looking to get more involved in entrepreneurship, or who really loved feeling empowered from getting really involved around what was going on in the wider world. And they wanted to help. And that led to, an over 30,000 person brand ambassador program that we spent the next, 8 years scaling and iterating on.
I actually did not know your Skimmbassadors program was so early in your journey. So maybe can you share more about that? And when you were like, oh gosh, there's so much opportunity here, because I'm sure that kind of unlocked the next level of the brand and the newsletter.
Yeah, it really helped us understand like what does loyalty to a brand mean and how do you measure that? And, over time, like we iterated on that program. So it's actually not how we define kind of loyalists anymore, but it was very much a part of our grassroots story. And it happened so organically. I mean, truly, like we sent out the first daily Skimm on a Tuesday, July 18th. Like from there, like within a week, people are replying to the email saying, I love this. Thank you. Like you sound just like my college roommate. Like, Debbie, is that you? Like it was, all these kind of pen pals. We would respond. And like, I remember I literally would respond on my phone when it says, on an email from your phone, like sent from my iPhone, and people would reply and be like, that's so cute to make it look like it's a real person. And I was like, no, it's literally me in a taxi, like you like responding. And anyway, so we had these people writing in, and somebody said, I'm like a brand ambassador for you. And we love our puns. So we were like, you're a Skimmbassador. So then all of a sudden we just had people calling themselves Skimmbassadors, and then we put structure around it. But really, when we would quantify it, the year over year, about 19% of our annual growth came from the referrals of our Skimmbassadors. So we didn't do paid marketing. We had no money to do that. This was before, honestly, like growth marketing, like was the thing it became. But roughly about 20% of our growth came from purely word of mouth of people just loving this brand from all over and telling people about it and competing for swag to tell more people about it. It was an extraordinary like way to grow and a way to kind of really build a movement around our brand. And then, it kind of reached its peak, and it's how we, think about loyalty is different today, but it was, such a part of the magic secret sauce of how we began.
I love that. That was my question in terms of like, how were they incentivized? And it seems like they were behind both of you and the brand itself, but the swag was kind of like a cherry on top at the
I'll
time.
say Danielle and I were very much, I don't think we were the incentive. I think actually like the community that they found each other through was amazing. I mean, you would hear stories of people, I remember like somebody had like an adoption, somebody was a lawyer, it helped her. People were meeting up in cities on their own. So then we would create these like ambassador events just to like be like, meet at this bar.
Was it the lost tux that someone
Oh
found
my
on
God.
an
It was
estate?
a wedding dress or a tux.
Yeah.
Somebody left their tux or wedding dress, I can't remember, on a plane. It was like at the like Delta desk in, terminal blank, like at this airport, as any Skimmbassador flying through. One of them picked it up, got it to them, like just crazy. Like, I remember we went to CES one year, and if you've never been, it's so many people. It was impossible to get a taxi. There were like Uber wasn't allowed yet at the airport. So you literally could not it would take like an hour and a half to get out of the airport. We didn't know that. So we like put on our, blasted our Skimmbassadors. Anybody live in Vegas? Somebody like came and picked us up and like took us to our hotel. It was just like,
Oh my
and
God.
it's like, of course we trusted it because it was like this community. It was amazing.
I love that. And then at the time, what platform were you guys using to connect everyone?
Well, this is why we evolved the program. We were using Facebook,
Okay.
and we were using Facebook groups.
I mean, I love it. It's scrappy, right? Like sometimes we overcomplicate things. And that's why I asked is like, you guys were just managing that and you guys were quite big, I believe, at the time and creating that momentum. But I would envision now, fast forward, 12, 13 years later, it'd have to change.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, so much of that ethos in the Skimm and its mission and culture have stayed really true. And obviously the ways that we show up in our audience's lives have changed. But that experience was something truly special. And I think going back to the original kind of question we went off of, but like what was it like to quit, I think that there was a real kind of gut instinct that we both had that this was our chance to do something that was going to take us on a really like incredible ride.
I love it. And what you were saying, and we'll go into how your fundraising experience was. I mean, you guys mentioned you got over 100 no's, but you had your customer, your readers sending you emails being like, this is amazing. So you knew intuitively, like, we are on something special here. So I'm curious, because even at that time, email wasn't like how email is today, right? Like now it's so prevalent. So how did you guys really, push through and find the right investors? Was it just a quantity game at that time? Or how did you eventually raise that round that you guys needed to kind of live your life and continue to get this off the ground?
I think a few different things. The first was we needed to get better at telling our story. We needed to get clearer, more concise. I think that that is where we went into this being both founders and co-CEOs. And I think that that's where a little bit we needed to show even the early days that we could tell and inspire the founding story, but we also had an operating plan, and maybe not with the first round, but definitely subsequent rounds of funding. I think that first round was investing in us and our relationship and our ability to take something from literally our couch into a real, product and company. That and then the test was, can we scale that? Can we scale ourselves? Can we start hiring a team? And can we grow? So we needed to really get very good at understanding that we knew the market inside and out. But we really needed to translate that for the type of investors that we were going after, which were venture seed investors who didn't come necessarily from media, who didn't understand the trends that we saw. And I remember, sitting on a bench in the village when we had just gotten like probably like the 10th no in a row, and we started just pitching to each other, um, and making it much more conversational and thinking about what was it, about what we just said that resonated. And we really took that spirit, and I remember redoing it and bringing that, slight tweak, I think both in confidence, but also just in kind of starting from a place of this is why we see an opportunity and this is why we are the right ones to do it, and here is, the growth that we're seeing so far. All of that sounds very rational, but at the time we had no idea that we were going to get funded. We just every day was pitching again and again and again, and then going to drop off flyers and talking to our community members and then writing the newsletter and then pitching again and again and again. I think that, the benefit of it was that you started to hear versions of the word no so many times, it really stops losing meaning. And I also think that it really forced us to focus on growth, organic growth, like, and putting out a good product, because those were the only things that we could control.
Mhm. I love that, and I know, I believe it was 2 years in, you didn't monetize, or you brought in your first sponsors a little bit later. So how did you think? So the focus was, "Let's build this thing, continue to build that momentum, prove our growth," and then how did you kinda think through monetization at that
You really
point?
did your homework. I'm impressed you knew that.
I've been following you guys. I love it. I'm fascinated.
Thank you. So I think that one of like the hallmarks to why we had success is that we had tremendous focus. And I really credit like our very first investors, like institutional investors or homebrew ventures. And Hunter and Satya, who run it, like they come from product backgrounds. So they were like, you have to have focus. We were like, we have focus. We're so focused. They're like, no, like focus like a product person. And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. And they're like, if there is anything on your plate in front of you that is not directly tied to growing this business, you're doing the wrong thing. And we decided early on that with like honestly with their help, because we were new to all of this, you can't reach growth scale and monetization scale at the exact same time. Like you have to choose one or the other, like at least in the beginning. And we were like, we got to do growth scale because we need to show how many millennial women like this brand and product are speaking to. So we focused on growth from day one, even before we took in outside investment. We had brands approaching us being like, we'd love to advertise. The honest truth is like we had no capacity to do those deals
Yeah.
because you're trying to raise money, trying to grow the brand, through word of mouth and then writing. So we just said we're not accepting advertisement. And nobody likes being told that they can't do something more than brands. And so we created kind of a scarcity interest in our company where people were like, you can't get in the Skimm, like even if you
Wow.
wanted to. That was a happy accident. I wish I could say we were strategic about it, but that was a happy accident. But we did say no once we took in institutional money to anyone trying to work with us until we reached a certain level of scale. And if I remember correctly, it was probably when we were like 200,000 users, something like that.
It's more.
Maybe more. You know what? You're right. It was like 500,000.
Yeah.
And that is when we then started to work with our very first partners. And our first three partners were JP Morgan Chase, or Chase, actually, the commercial side, the NBA, and the PGA. And we purposely chose those categories because everybody was waiting for us to work with a beauty brand. And we wanted to work with brands that you wouldn't expect needed to reach women. And a finance brand was super important to us because we all know what the stats look like around financial literacy for women and how women have been left behind in generating wealth. We were like obsessed with like, how do we get sports involved? And how do we get finance involved? And those were our very first brand partners.
I love how you guys were approaching it from a different angle and how you waited a little bit longer. And even, what your investors said about focusing on what is really just going to move the needle. Like, I'm already mentally making a note for our business. Cause then if you just really focus, you're like, all right, this is a waste of time. This is a waste of time. So it sounds so simple, but can really help you stay kind of focused on those next steps. So I'm also curious, you guys have both been co-CEOs in the business. I'd love to hear from your perspective. I've heard people's experiences. Some of them really work. Some of them are like, it's been quite challenging. So how have you guys kind of fostered this relationship? Because I know early on, in a positive way, you guys were very open and transparent about the partnership. And I want to talk about this because a lot of people, including myself in my own business, I didn't have these open conversations. So I think a lot of women can actually learn from the way you guys set that up.
Well, first of all, I think, I speak for both of us that it is really rare. And it is something that I think is really hard to know if it's going to work out in the beginning. And we, going back to one of the hallmarks of kind of our story is that we didn't know anything different. Neither one of us had a business background. Neither one of us was kind of like the tech one or the product one. We had a really similar skill set, which at times was tough, but also was really helpful because we needed to figure out things and learn them together. And I think especially as two young women, first time entrepreneurs in a very male dominated field, it was honestly really like it was a confidence boon to me to have someone right next to me who was learning the exact same thing at the exact same time. And between the two of us, one of us was always kind of the better one at that moment of faking it till you make it. I also think that on the management side internally, we had so much to learn and there was so much to do that having, two extremely dedicated people is just invaluable. I am reading this fact that our PR team sent us, which I didn't know, but apparently a Harvard Business Review study of 87 public companies led by co-CEOs found that almost 60% were more profitable.
Really?
Than peers who had
Wow.
one person in the top spot. And that is literally the only time I have used data to back that up. But I thought it
We
was
should
really
just walk around
fascinating.
with that. Wow.
Yeah. But for us, it's a deeply personal choice. We went into this as partners. We went into this as equal partners. And, that's been the choice that we made again and again and again. And we were very clear with anyone who worked with us or works for us over the past 11 years that hey, this is different, but it works for us and it's how we've chosen to do things. I also think that so much of being an entrepreneur is lonely and isolating, and there are really high degrees of burnout and anxiety and all sort of issues that go along with being crazy enough to go on your own adventure. That I think having someone who understands what you're going through when you're too exhausted to talk is really important. That being said, the only way where it works for us is that there's trust, and it's a really hard thing to build. It's a really hard thing to maintain, and it's a hard thing to find. So it's a long way of saying it is, I think, been so core to the success of the company. It's also not something that we can say is definitely right for anyone. I would say, though, that when you find something that works for you, if it's unorthodox, like just go with it. And I think there needs to be a lot more leeway around what organizations look like, especially when we want to have a diverse group of entrepreneurs and leadership, who are going to be starting companies hopefully at all different points in their life. And their families and their days are going to look different. And so leadership and organizational structure should also look a little bit different too.
I love that. What you mentioned about, you guys have been doing this for, gosh, 13 years now, has it been?
No,
Maybe
not
more?
that. 11.
11. Okay. I'd rounded up a little bit. Still
Don't
quite a
age us.
long time. I know. But I'm sure in entrepreneurship years, it seems
The
short but
dog
long at
years,
the same
yeah.
time, right? You're like, what has happened the past decade? I'm sure it's been wild. But, what I've been realizing, I'm just only a few years in my journey, is like the loneliness, the burnout, the anxiety, like that is definitely there. And the ones that kind of sustain the longevity, like you guys, is like, how do you manage that on a day to day? And you mentioned, having a co-CEO, co-founder definitely helps. Someone really understands a day to day, because it's not like you can talk to your friends. It's really hard to articulate kind of the emotional tolls that you might be going through. So I can see that being a huge competitive advantage of having somebody just truly on your team who gets it. And outside of that, I'm actually curious, like, how have you guys kind of sustained running this business and being the leaders of it for so long? Because I know it's not easy, and so much of it is staying in the game, right? So outside of having both of you guys, any other tips that you can share for entrepreneurs who are just getting started, who are like, all right, I'm in this for the long game. It's already hard. What do I need to do to make sure I don't die by the end of it?
I think a few things, with sort of a caveat. Honestly, like, unless you are talking to somebody like in it with you, nobody's going to understand. Not the best spouse, not the best family member, not the best therapist. Like,
Yeah,
they're not going to understand. Um, so I think one, like, accepting that. I think, over the course, like, we have both gone to therapy separately, but like, to, have an outlet. But I also will say, like, I'll speak for myself, but like, I love my therapist. She doesn't understand like this. Like, if I had explained work stress, things that she would say are like not actually like possible. But it is still an outlet. I think for both of us, like me more than Danielle, because when we started this, like, I never worked out ever. And like Danielle at least like had. But like the physical activity and like having that blocked and protected in our calendars is saved us. It's the only time that my brain will like turn off. And you got to find the right outlet for you. But it's like the one time where I'm like not thinking about all the things. And, I think Danielle once said it well to us, like, part of what makes a really good CEO is that you can context switch quickly and a lot. And you can go from being like public facing to talking to investors to dealing with an HR crisis to whatever is like you're leaning into in the day-to-day product, whatever it is. We can do that really, really well, but almost too well. Like, it's not healthy for your
sure.
brain to like have to be almost like in a fight or flight situation at all times. So we've become the most boring but rigid people, and that our schedules are like really set in stone. And when we exercise or go to therapy, like, is really, really put into our calendar as like sacred time. Don't touch it unless the Pope's coming into town. Don't cancel over it. And I really, really, really recommend that. And it's hard to put into words like how important that is. I have also found, like, I'm not somebody who journals, but when things are particularly stressful, I find like literally just writing out what is stressful is just the equivalent of like saying it to somebody. So it's like off your chest, but even
Sure.
if it's just like having written it out.
No, that resonates a lot. And I needed to hear you say that, because I am not one that prioritizes movement. And you can always say the excuse, we're busy. Like, in this world,
By the
you
way,
can
like
always
movement,
work,
like
right?
I go on a
Yeah.
walk. That's movement. Like, that's
Yeah.
not like doing
Oh,
anything
that's
really
helpful.
there. But
Yeah, but even being protective about that.
That's a big improvement from 11 years ago. So it's progress. But I think also there's, you know, it's really about just making the time to um, get out of your head. And I feel like I really can't do that unless I'm physically exhausting myself in some way. Like it just does not turn off. Or reading, I think does that for both of us too. Carly went through phases. I think where cooking really did that for her too. So I think trying new things is part of it. But I think it's key to have a good support system, and to go to the basics, right? Like what actually allows your mind to rest is that physical activity. Is it sleep?
It's a
I
huge one
don't
for both of
advocate.
us.
Yeah, like the lifestyle that we had to adopt for the first 2 years or so of running the company was necessary, but I don't think that it is healthy or advisable to lead your life with that amount of kind of sleep deprivation. I also think that one thing that we really talk about and became even more central when we were running the company during a pandemic is that some people save lives for a living every single day. We don't do that. Doesn't mean that what we do isn't, something that we're super passionate about. It is, but there has to be a very big dose of perspective, and that's something that I think gets easily left behind when you talk about entrepreneurs. The other thing, and I credit this, I remember Alexa von Tobel gave us this advice. It was like, the longer you do it, it doesn't get easier, it gets harder. It's just that the things that were hard are now easy. And I remember being really kind of destroyed by that advice and was like, that is so not helpful. But now it's now I find it actually very soothing where I'm like, if it feels hard, it's just because I haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Or because it really is hard. And either way, this is something that is new, and I'm gonna learn it. And I think the last thing that I would say, the piece of advice, and I just gave this to someone in my family who, got a new job offer, and they were really like, wow, am I ready for this? And I was like, no one really knows what they're doing, honestly. Like we're all kind of figuring it out. And I don't mean to lean into the imposter syndrome part, but just more that like, you kind of have to embrace being uncomfortable. It's the only way that you're going to grow.
I love that. And, a huge inspiration for me finally taking the leap, like 12 years of my journey, was talking to women like you doing this podcast, because I'm like, oh, no one's ever ready. No one has it figured out. And I have friends who are, running significantly larger businesses of mine who I see behind the scenes. And I'm like, we're
Yeah,
all
nobody
dealing
has
with the
any
same
idea.
stuff. Yeah. It's like, but at a different scale, but it's all the
Yeah.
fundamentally like everyone is figuring something out. And I love that, you mentioned, Danielle, just like being comfortable in the uncomfort, because that will never change. And even when I'm dealing with a difficult moment in the business, I at least get to reflect back on these interviews and be like, all right, it's part of it. It's part of the journey. I'm not going to freak out. And if it was easy, then everybody would do it, right? So like I tell myself that to console
It's good that
myself.
you have this podcast to do.
It's
It's
like
like free
therapy.
therapy. Yeah.
I know. People are like, how do you still do your podcast with your business? I'm like, it's a creative outlet. I get to help, share stories. And it's helpful for me because it's truly lonely, right? No one understands. Like, I go to an acupuncturist. I try to still do the
I do
basics, like
that
sleep is
too. Yeah.
important. Yeah, like whatever I need to do. And, a constant theme that I hear is like, can you just wind down earlier in the evening? And I don't feel like I'm stressed out, but you're always thinking. I'm responding to an email, like your iPhone example. Like I respond randomly to customers and they're like, wait, is that you, Yasmin? I'm like, yeah, it's me. But like, it's hard because nobody understands.
I hate when people say that because that's like telling somebody having a panic attack to calm down. It's like, thank you for that really helpful advice.
Yeah.
I think it's instead, how do you have more moments in your day where you're literally lowering your cortisol? And like that is like for your health, and like gives your brain a rest. And so whether it is cooking, taking a walk, doing, a soul cycle class, like whatever it is, like knitting, like whatever, find your
Yeah.
thing that just like where you zone out. Everyone has something that makes them zone out. And maybe you zone out enough that you take a nap, and that's great.
That's true. But I love that because it's like, how do you build it in the day? Because we're not ever turning off. It's not like we
Yeah,
have a 9 to 5. So,
right.
no, I appreciate that. And even Danielle, what you were saying about perspective, I think like sometimes we can get so stuck in the nitty gritty that as a CEO, like it's not even beneficial for you to have that mindset because you have to be able to zoom out. So I'm even realizing, oh shit, I have to take breaks because it's not good for the business. And I think I can't remember which one of you said this in an interview, but you were like, you know what? I realized I had to take more breaks. I had to take vacation because if I'm not well, then the business isn't well. Because sometimes you forget about yourself, especially when you're in the early days and, you're learning what to do. But
There's also, I do think we're in a different era right now where, self-care has had its moment. I will
sure.
say, like, there was almost like a little bit of kind of feeling cool to be like, look how much I'm
Yeah,
suffering for this
it's
business and
true.
like how hard I can push myself. And it's a very like old, like I will say, like kind of even male mentality. Whereas now, I never would have mentioned therapy on a podcast 5 years ago, ever, never. So I think now we're definitely, we should embrace the fact that like a lot of societal norms have changed and like you don't win any badges by saying you like wear yourself out and burn yourself out. It actually shows you're not a strong decision maker if you're doing that.
I love that. God, we need to put that on like a billboard. It's so true. I come from the banking days. So I'm like, the harder you work, the shit you get done, but you start a business and you're like, all right, those hours I used to pull, it's very different. Like you can do it for a little, but it's not sustainable. And I'm so glad we're talking about self-care. And it's like, how do we shift building and running successful businesses in a different
And
way? And
by
I,
the way, like it's not to say like I really do not like when people take that a different way and are like, it's not about working like too hard. Like if you want to get something off the ground, like you got to work harder than you ever worked in your life. But you have to have the stamina to sprint when you need to sprint and
I love that.
not have to sprint when you don't need to sprint.
I love it. I think I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about like giving an example of a lion. Like they're chilling, they're resting, but then they go hard when it's like
Yeah.
time to go. And I'm like,
Yeah,
that
those
is it. And
lions take
sometimes
some good naps.
I know I see them and they look so relaxed. I'm like, so I always think about that. Like being a lion, you just like, you take your breaks, but you go hard. And that's a great point. And I even share that with my team. It's like, this is part of it. Like we have sprints, but then there's times that we're going to rest. And that's just the name of the game. I think if you want to build something like incredible and big, which is not for everyone. So I'm actually curious if we can maybe get your perspectives around who do you think should it be an entrepreneur or kind of take this path? That might be a controversial question. So,
No, it's not.
I think that if you don't consider yourself to be a resilient person, you're going to have a really hard time being an entrepreneur. I think that's probably the biggest thing for me because everything else I think you learn, from a skill set perspective or you have the ability to learn.
I would add, and like I think this is controversial, if you are not good at selling yourself, you will have a really hard time being an entrepreneur. And I know a lot of people who are like brilliant and have, are amazing ideas and, can work with product teams or tech teams or, revenue teams, but they don't know how to sell themselves in a room. They should not be like in charge of a company. They could be like a great, COO. They could be a great like top executive, but you need to be able, no matter what type of business you're starting, like you need to be able to sell that business. And to sell that business, like you need to be able to brag and you need to be able to kind of channel a different personality to do that sometimes. And it makes it really uncomfortable for those who don't like that. Like it doesn't mean everybody has to be an extrovert. We're actually both very introverted, but you have to be able to like put that mask on because no matter whatever type of company you have, in the end, you're going to have a customer or a need for funding or a need to get
true.
something from somebody, and you need to be able to sell.
I love that. And you guys are so passionate about the mission. So I'm sure that helps a little bit. If it's something that you're not fully passionate about, it will make it so much harder.
Totally.
But Carly and Danielle, I feel like I could talk to you for hours. I know we went a little bit over, but this was amazing. Maybe we'll do a part 2 in the future, but you guys are both incredible, big fans. Thank you so, so much for just sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.